I'm a fan of the fantasy genre, and I always wanted to make a fantasy movie, so the opportunity to make a Solomon Kane picture was too good to pass up. And of course I read the books from Robert Howard when I was a teenager. And so 10, 15 years later, to be presented with the opportunity to make that story into a movie is just a dream come true. And then to be able to make a movie which takes the fantasy genre to a place which I don't think it's really been done before, or certainly not for a long time. For me, fantasy is not necessarily a children's genre. And I thought with Kane, because he's a very serious, very dark, heroic figure, I could just change it a little bit and make a movie which is strongly character-based, has all the running, jumping, chasing, horse riding, swords, demons and monsters. But actually when you really look at it, there are lots of layers and lots of symbolism and lots of ideas working in there as well. So that was kind of one, I was a fan, but two, the opportunity was a really great one. Well, I didn't stick to the original story at all. The intention with this was to create an origins tale for Solomon Kane. Robert Howard never did. When you read his stories, Kane is a fully formed character who is a Puritan swordsman going around the world combating evil because he believes God wants him to do that. And that's a great character, I loved it. But the producers were very keen on the idea that we create an origin for this character so that a wider audience could understand him. Not just Solomon Kane fans already, but people who go way, way beyond that audience. Because if you just drop the audience into it, I don't think, and I agree, I don't think they were fully going to go on the ride. What we want to do is make a series of movies about the character. So this first one is about why he is like he is. So it was up to me to make a story which would work. So I used my own ideas, took liberties with the ideas that Robert Howard had in his stories, and reading little bits of dialogue and little ideas which said, he thought he was a bad man, he was evil. There were ideas which gave me the nucleus of the story of maybe he's an evil man who wants to redeem himself and comes to an understanding with his God to say, I can fight for you and I can do things for you to redeem myself. So that's where the origins of the story is. And then of course in classic mythology and legendary figures, the hero going to save the pure girl for his own redemption, that's a classical idea as well. And the Faustian idea of a condemned soul trying to get out of his deal with the devil. So all of those things together, that's the story. But by the end of the movie, the Solomon Kane who rides out of the story is the Solomon Kane of the books. Well, James was always on the list. It was one of these ideas of when you cast Solomon Kane, it's such an important decision for the film. And it's so profoundly affecting the entire production that you've got to get the right guy. And there are very few men in modern movies who don't feel like pretty boys, who feel like they're rugged and able to look after themselves and belong in a period as well. And there's a handful of actors like that, and their names always come up. With James, who'd just recently done Rome, and he was wonderful as Mark Antony, his name came up, and I knew him a little bit. So I said, well, okay, let's talk to James, and let's see how he responds to the script. And I wasn't sure he was going to like it. So he came in, and I explained what I wanted to do. He'd read the script at this stage. I showed him my storyboards and my artwork, and he said, yeah, I really like the character. I really like what we can do with it. And he understood that I was trying to make a character piece. And he understood that I was going to ask him to push himself physically and mentally as he'd never been done before in a movie. So that was really the key, is to find an actor who can bring his A game to the role. And also, the wider audience may be not so familiar with James, and that for me is a terrific advantage, because James Purefoy is Solomon Kane. For most people, they're just going to see this guy and he is absolutely the character. And they give him a very different look from his other characters as well, his long hair and the hat and the cloak. And he gave his heart and soul to this movie, and the best thing about the film for me is what James does with it. Well, I wanted to make a movie which had a very direct sense of violence, a sort of brutality, not just the sword fighting, but the world itself is a grim, harsh world that the characters live in. There's evil there, there's real evil in this world. So once you start having those ideas, so it's a historical piece, it's a fantasy piece. So and how then best can we present the violence of the world as well? And I wanted it to be very direct and very brutal. So that's down to the conversations with the stunt master and the sword master and say, how are we going to do this? And Kane as a character is a wonderful swordsman. In the books he's a wonderful swordsman in every iteration of who he is. So that was the first thing to do, is how is he going to fight? Two swords. How's that going to work? I didn't want lots of leaping around and wire work like Hong Kong action movies. I wanted him to draw a sword, kill you. But beautiful to look at, but very violent. And I spilt a lot of blood on the film, and some of it made it to the movie, and some of it will make it to the DVD. And there are moments when people say, that's just too much. And there's a point in the film where he takes 3 cuts to get somebody's head off. So it's cut, cut, cut. You know, and they're saying, no, that's too much. But I can tell you, one of the things I did, I wanted to see what swords really did to flesh. Because I've never seen a sword fight. I don't believe most people have. They've seen movie sword fights. So I wanted to find out what a sword could do to flesh. So I told my sword master to get me a dead pig. So we got a dead pig, and we sharpened the swords, and I said, hack the pig up, please. So we hung it from the studio ceiling, and we all had a go at reading a double-bladed sword into the pig flesh. And I can tell you what a sword does, and it makes a real mess. Individual scenes, they sort of, because they merge into one, the whole production was challenging because it was very, very physical. You know, I like to make movies which are outside. I don't like to be in a studio. I like to throw, atmosphere, rain and snow and harsh conditions, because I think it makes the movie come alive in a very real way. I didn't like shooting scenes in caves very much. Because there's so much dust kicked up, and you have to wear these face masks, and it gets very, very hot because of the lights, and then it gets really, really cold and the lights get turned off. That's a challenge. For me, I'm the director. I can stand by the monitors and I wear a nice big warm coat. It's when I'm throwing 60,000 litres of water a day onto the extras and onto the performers, they have the really hard time. I just come out from under the umbrella and go, that was really good, let's do it again. Solomon Kane.